Natasha Clark was in the room where it happens, Pinewood Studios in Buckinghamshire. The context, in fact, for a rather good joke with which Keir Starmer opened proceedings, and she asked what was, by my entirely unbiased measure, probably the best question of the conference as well. So, and she joins me on the line now. Natasha, just remind us why this speech was either made or necessary.
James, this is Keir Starmer's plan for change speech today. It's all about setting out what he says will be deliverable milestones. Are you keeping up at the back there? I hope you are. About what are going to be achieved in his first 5 years in power. Now, he's already set out the missions, he set out the milestones, he set out the foundations. My question to him was, isn't all of this quite confusing for the public to keep up with? What are your true priorities for what you want to achieve in the first sort of 5 years of your government, and exactly what that will look like? Because it's all very good saying that you want to kickstart economic growth, make our streets safer, build an NHS fit for the future, break down barriers for opportunity, and make Britain a clean energy superpower. But what does it mean? When are you going to get there? What are your actual targets for making it happen? So today's speech was all about putting a little bit more flesh on the bone of that. But there were some really interesting messages in there, James. And I think Keir Starmer is clearly quite keen to learn lessons from what's happened with Donald Trump in the United States and try and prove that he is going to actually deliver for the people, to stop the rise of populist other parties like Nigel Farage, like Reform, who we know in some areas are snapping at Labour's heels. Here's what he had to say on tackling some of those threats that he feels in our democracy.
Everyone can see there's a growing impatience with traditional politics. Everyone can see how people are tired with those who fail to get the job done. Now, populism isn't the answer to Britain's challenges. Easy answers won't make our country strong. But nobody can deny that this kind of politics feeds off real concerns. In fact, that's the crux of the matter. People haven't become radical ideologues. We are still, in our values, a pragmatic nation. What people want from their politics, that hasn't changed. They want a stable economy. They want their country to be safe, their borders secure, more cash in their pockets, safer streets in their town, opportunities for their children, secure British energy in their home, and an NHS that is fit for the future. And that is why we've set these missions to make our country strong, missions to make working people better off, missions this government will deliver.
But James, you remember Rishi Sunak's 5 pledges. He tried this sort of strategy a few months ago, about 2 years ago now. It didn't work out so well for him. He either was bashed, essentially, for making these ambitions, like we've talked about so many times about the pledge about bringing down inflation, which too many people said, well, it's going to come down anyway. So why bother making it a key part of your government's agenda? Or you end up basically doing what Keir Starmer's doing today and of setting these really, really big ambitions that some people say are just not going to be achievable. And I thought Keir Starmer was pretty flat today. I didn't feel a lot of energy in the room until the end of his speech. I didn't really still see his vision for what the country is going to be. Like I say, this is a little bit more of the flesh on the bones. We're definitely seeing a little bit more about exactly what he wants to do. But there has been some criticism of some of these promises and whether they have been watered down in the months since Labour have come into power, specifically the promise for clean power by 2030. That has now been changed slightly to 95% on track to meet clean power. That's a little bit of a downgrade, as well as the one on economic growth. They said they wanted to secure the fastest growing growth in the G7. That's now been downgraded to an aim. I asked him earlier today whether this is just proof that actually governing is really very hard. And obviously in the environment that we're in, of course, we've talked about this so much before, about the rise of populist threats, about the rise of
this
people
is
like
really
Nigel
interesting.
Farage.
Yes.
And I think that Keir Starmer absolutely has to try and give the public something to hold onto, to hold him to account. But actually, when you've got quite a lot of vague promises, quite a lot of very difficult promises,
Well,
and not a lot of
it's not
specifics.
all vague. 1.5 million homes is pretty specific. NHS waiting list coming down is pretty specific. Raising living standards is nebulous but measurable. But so it's 6 of one and half a dozen of the other. But I'm fascinated by the. We talked a bit about this yesterday. The pivot on immigration in terms of the next 5 years before a general election. This is arguably the most significant surprise of the last few days, the last few weeks, because Starmer is doing what previous Labour leaders have not done, and he is going into that space with strong language, whereas previously they've kind of hoped the whole immigration conversation would go away. It struck me that there's nobody now in mainstream politics, this may be unfair on the Liberal Democrats, but people who are comfortable with immigration are now almost entirely unrepresented in the political space.
Yeah, I think that's completely right. And Keir Starmer, again, repeating some of that quite tough language that we heard last week at Downing Street in his speech today. But immigration isn't a big part of his plan for the country. And lots of questions today from lots of journalists about why that was.
Were you surprised how many? I mean, I thought he answered once, we are absolutely committed to reducing immigration, both legal and illegal. And then he kept getting asked, why aren't you committing to reducing immigration, both legal and illegal? I'm not suggesting I felt sorry for him, but I did find myself wondering whether some of your colleagues in the lobby could perhaps have rejigged their planned question, having heard someone ask the identical one 2 seconds previously.
I know, it's so hard, isn't it, James? I've got this big long list of questions and you just have to scrap them out. You'd have to get your big biro and just go through them as he goes. And sometimes, though, I do think the Prime Minister does need a little bit of a nudge when he doesn't answer the question.
Yes.
I don't think he really fully said why immigration is so important to him. He wants to see it down. Well, if that is the case, then why not put it in this plan? Why not make it a promise? Why not make it a pledge? He keeps talking about how he doesn't want to be a gimmicky Prime Minister with sticking plaster politics, but actually making all of these really, really ambitious promises. If he doesn't meet them, they're going to become millstones around his neck, not milestones. And he's going to get weighed down by these huge promises, this huge ambition, if he can't deliver it. So I think he's going to get it in one neck for being too vague. One neck for not being specific and bold and ambitious enough. It's a really tricky thing for him to do today, to try and lay out this plan. Obviously, the government is saying Number 10 will tell us this has actually all been, planned for months, and we always wanted to do a speech a few months into government to show how we've been getting on. But actually, there will become a point where people will start saying, OK, this is your plan. You've got to show us some actual progress about when it's going to come, how you're going to get to it, what it's going to look like. Or in 5 years' time, he's not going to have made much progress towards any of these goals, and the British public just won't be able to see it. And I think at the moment, having these 5 sort of missions, these quite sort of, I think they are vague missions generally, and like I say, they've got some specifics involved in them. But I think a lot of people will be asking, when are we going to start to see the fruits of this change?
What's a mission? What's
change.
A milestone? What's a goal? What's an aim? A little bit of the Edstone, the ghost of the Edstone, perhaps haunting proceedings today. I take all of your points. Kemi Badenoch has responded in characteristically mind-boggling fashion, claiming that Labour has had 14 years in opposition and still weren't ready for government, and then listing all the things that he hasn't done that would involve fixing the things that happened over the course of the 14 years when the Conservatives were in government.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, there is a little bit of that. LBC spoke to Gus O'Donnell, the former Cabinet Secretary, on LBC a couple of days ago, and he said that he didn't believe that Labour had done enough work to prepare for government. Remember who was meant to be preparing Labour for government? It was Sue Gray, and she's not lasted too long in Labour's top team either. So I do think there are some problems for the communications of this government to try and iron out their messaging of exactly what they want to achieve. I think it is, of course, good that we're holding them to account and that they are coming out and saying that this is the things that we are going to do.
Will they be pleased with how it went today, do you think?
Yeah, I think so. I think there was obviously a bit of frustration about us sort of picking holes in the net zero target being slightly moved, us picking holes in migration, us picking holes in the G7 promise. But, that is journalism. That is what we're paid to do. But I think a lot of people will see a lot of confusion in what the government are trying to put out. And I think they will welcome a bit of clarity from the government on exactly what their main priorities are and exactly how they are going to achieve them. And a lot of people say, look, we did hear a lot about this in the manifesto, these 13,000 extra police officers. But for Keir Starmer, he knows that if he's going to see off this threat from Nigel Farage, from reform, and he's not going to let what happened in the States come to the UK, he needs to actually talk about what is important to people, the people's priorities. And these are the bread and butter issues economic growth, NHS, crime. All of these things are really, if you look at every YouGov poll, if you look at every survey, these are the bread and butter issues that are important to the public. He's now got to go and get on, deliver it, show us that the change that the British public voted for in that election is actually happening. That's going to be a huge, huge task for him to do. But yes, this is exactly what's set out in front of him.
That is his entire to-do list. Natasha Clark, LBC's political editor, live at Pinewood Studios in Buckinghamshire. The mad thing is, as I've told you many, many times, is that the public's interest in immigration, or the prioritisation of immigration, you can track it according to how many front pages it's getting in the right-wing media, or how much attention it's getting in the right-wing media. It goes off a cliff if you're not being constantly told to be frightened of it or worried about it. But Starmer has made a decision. He has made a decision to embrace the idea that immigration is not only a major issue, but also a sort of net negative, something that needs to be reduced, something that needs to be addressed. And we'll see how that works out for him. On the law and order stuff, I couldn't help hearing echoes of yesterday's conversation about the delays in court. If you're waiting 4 or 5 years to see the person who committed a crime against you actually stand trial, I don't know whether or not having bobbies on the beat, and I welcome community policing for reasons we've explained in many, many, many ways over the years. I don't know how many parsnips that's going to butter.